Okay, good. I've got some notes. I might look at them, I might not. Just depends on whether I get lost. But thank you very much for this opportunity to talk you through Radiocentre's latest research project called Strike a Chord. And it's very much centred around the use of music, which sort of represents a bit of a departure from our normal effectiveness-based studies, all of which demonstrate that radio has an incredibly powerful multiplier effect within the media mix. However, across the course of these studies, observational analysis has indicated that music seems to play quite an important role in the more successful radio advertising campaigns. So we set out to look into music in a little bit more depth, and started by looking at some research studies that have been conducted into the field. Yes, the famous, at least in the UK commercial radio industry, Adrian North Wine experiment considers how music exerts incredibly powerful effects at a subconscious level. It basically consisted of two equal displays of French wine and German wine in a supermarket with related music playing in the background. And on the days when typically French music played, I believe with an accordion, then the French wine outsold the German wine by 5 bottles to 1. And on the days when the typically German Papa music played, clearly there were fewer issues with national stereotyping in 1997, then the German wine outsold the French wine by 2 bottles to 1. So all very interesting, but even more interesting was when they asked the shoppers, after they'd made the purchase, to what extent did the music influence your decision? Most people replied, what music? The music had caused them to buy a particular type of wine without them even realizing. There's also been some, quite a lot of research done to music in advertising. Most recently, a lot of work from Les Binet and Daniel Mullensiefen of Goldsmiths University, and they basically demonstrate that music in advertising helps increase attention to the ads, helps drive recall of the ad, the brand, the product, and the message, and can have quite significant effects on sales as well. So far so good, all pretty convincing, I would imagine. And from this survey by brand consultancy Sounds Like Branding, it would appear that most multinational brand managers would agree. 97% of them believe that music can strengthen a brand. So you might be sitting there saying, well, why are you talking to us about music research and doing some new stuff? Surely the case has already been made. Well, actually, this same piece of research demonstrated that only 38% of those same international brand managers actually have a defined brand sound. Somehow, this inherent belief in the power of music for brands isn't quite translating into action. So the first stage of this project was to understand what the barriers might be, and then to try and define some ways of overcoming those barriers. We appointed a research company called Push Research, and they started by speaking to 62 people across the ad industry. Some real legends from the creative side of the business, the planning side, and the client side as well. And what they told us was this. Music is quite a tricky, complicated area for them, and it's often an afterthought at the executional stage of the process rather than a strategic consideration. But they all acknowledged that music has got untapped potential in terms of driving brand recognition, repositioning a brand, or also driving efficiencies across the media mix. So we asked them, well, how could this project help unlock the use of music for advertisers? They said two things. Number one, they'd like new information. New information, that's correct. New information to demonstrate the effects of music when used consistently in advertising. And secondly, they're after guidance. A new way of thinking about music that's more objective, combined with some practical outputs to help them navigate the world of music and brands more effectively. So that's what we set out to do. So starting with the first, we set out to ask ourselves a question: do ads that use music consistently outperform any other ads? And when I'm talking about consistent use of music here, we define this as music that is used by advertisers across more than one campaign, across multiple media, and across more than 1 year. So to give you an idea, I don't know if any of you ever travel with British Airways, but hopefully this piece of music will be familiar.
Make lasting memories of Cyprus. Fly British Airways from London Gatwick to Paphos and Larnaca from £79 one way with our hand baggage only option.
Okay, is that familiar to you? So they've been using that piece of music for years. That's what we mean by consistent music. However,
make lasting memories of...
I thought we'd listen to it again. Radio always works with frequency, doesn't it? So there's a challenge, though. As we saw with the wine experiment, music seems to communicate very powerfully at a subconscious level, which presents a bit of a challenge from a research perspective, because people find it very difficult to articulate how the music is making them feel. So we eventually settled on a process called NeuroQual, which essentially combines the best of EEG, neuroscience, and qualitative research to give people both their implicit and their explicit response to stimulus. So in terms of the EEG, we wired up 16 participants to our EEG rig. If 16 people doesn't sound a lot, in the world of neuroscience, it's perfectly fine. That's all you need to get statistically significant results. Yes, and then we monitored what was going on in their brains when they were exposed to stimulus, and that gives us their implicit response. And across the process, we also asked them a series of questions, which we asked them to score on a 1 to 4 point scale, and that gave us their explicit response to the stimulus. And the stimulus we played them was a total of 27 radio ads split into 3 pots. The first were a set of ads that use music consistently. The second were a set of ads that use music, but only on a tactical or a one-off basis. And the third pot were ads that didn't feature any music at all. And to ensure it was a credible and robust, fair test, we had to select brands representing quite a range of categories, which we matched across our 3 pots, as well as the broad sort of music types that we used in the ads. And also we ensured that all of the ads had a sister TV campaign that was closely related to the radio. And here's the stimulus. It's not going to mean a lot to you people here, but it doesn't really matter because we don't look at the individual ads. We were only interested in looking at the headline figures at an aggregate level across the 3 different pots. And finally, to ensure that this was a sort of a rigorous and scientifically valid test, we teamed with Goldsmiths University to run this part of the project, who are ranked #1 in the UK for neuroscience and psychology. So perfectly suited. So let's start with the explicit ad measures. And as you can see on the left, the ads that use music consistently, in those instances, the music is liked much more than music which is only used tactically. Now this is interesting because it sort of contradicts one of the concerns that agencies told us about using music on an ongoing basis, which is if you use the same piece of music all the time, then eventually people are going to get bored and start to zone out of the advertising. This actually suggests there's an opposite effect going on. And on the right-hand side, we find that music used consistently fits better with the brand, which I guess sort of stands to reason. It backs up what we heard from advertisers, telling us about the importance of music for brand recognition, and also sort of hints at some of the tonal fit you can get between music and brand that develops over time. In terms of the explicit measures relating to the advertising, on the left here we see that ads that use music consistently are much more liked. And I think this ties into what in psychology is called the familiarity principle, or the mere exposure effect, which says that repeated exposure to stuff that is not completely intolerable actually makes us like it more. So this sort of backs up that point earlier, which is it draws people in. And you can see also on the right there that the ads that use music consistently feel more familiar. I mean, that is a bit obvious, isn't it? That if you use music all the time, your advertising is going to feel familiar. But then that also has that knock-on effect on likability as well. And across the process, when we spoke to people, there was almost instantaneous recognition of consistent music within the first few bars playing out. And people talked about, how clearly that cut through. And this is just one example of many quotes that we got. Obviously, it is the best one. That's why I put it here. But it is representative of the others as well. I particularly like that thing. I would know it instinctively without seeing it. The music is the brand. So that's the explicit stuff. What's going on with the implicit stuff? Well, so in this particular test, as I said, we wired these people up, measured the electrical impulses in their brain. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to focus on their beta-gamma level response. There's a few reasons for that. Number one, it's the highest level of brain activation you can get and maybe gives the best sense of what we might term engagement from an advertising perspective. Also, they are linked to the reward centres in the brain, so it also gives a sense of greater enjoyment of the stimulus. And then finally, a study from last year linked high beta-gamma response with commercial success of the product that was being advertised. So it's a neural marker for commercial success as well. And here's what we found. So the bar charts show the beta and gamma band power, and as we can see across both of them, there's a much higher level of activation or electrical response for the ads that use music consistently compared to tactically or no music at all. Perhaps it's easier to look at the heat maps underneath, where you get a very clear sense of this higher level of brain activation for the consistent music ads. In fact, if you aggregate up those scores, the beta and gamma together, you find that the consistent music ads have 23% higher levels of activation than ads that don't use music at all, and actually a 41% higher activation compared to the ads that only use music tactically or on a one-off basis. I think that's an incredibly interesting point, because it's sort of back to that point earlier about does using music put people off from tuning into the ads. Actually, this shows it has the opposite effect. It makes the ads feel more familiar, they're better liked, and it helps reach out and engage people with advertising at a much deeper level. So, I think there's a lot of stuff in there which sort of chimes with Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow. I don't know whether you've heard of that. It's from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute of Marketing in Australia, and he talks about how brands grow through developing mental availability by using strong brand cues, such as music, repeatedly to build share of mind. And music, clearly, in our test, seems to ratify that. So if that's how music communicates for brands, what we're going to move on to have a look at now is what music communicates for brands. Because if you're an advertiser and you're using a piece of music consistently over time, it's going to implicitly communicate something about your brand, whether you've thought about it or not. So, and this sort of ties into the second objective of the study, which is to provide a bit of guidance about how brands and music can be linked more objectively. So we thought about this study, this part of the study a lot, considered lots of different methodologies, but eventually settled on semiotics. So for those of you that are less familiar with semiotics, it is the study of signs in society, or what I like to say, it's sort of the meaning of things beyond just the words. So for example, we interpret these toilet door signs almost unconsciously because we've seen variants of them thousands of times across our lives. And even though not all women wear dresses these days, we still know it means toilets here. Apart from if you're my wife and you're on your mobile phone, you tend to follow me into the toilet, but that's another story. But anyway, so all very interesting. How does it relate to music? Well, semiotics allows us to identify a signifier, be it a note or a chord, and link it to what it signifies, which could be a notion or an emotion. So to sort of bring it to life a little bit, let's consider the sort of ways that music can communicate meaning. We're going to start by having a listen to a couple of pieces of music and on the basis of tempo. So here's the first one. Bit of Dave Brubeck, The Aficionados. It's quite a fast time signature, over 100 beats per minute. And a slightly odd one as well. I think it's 5/4 timing, but that gives it quite a driving, urgent sort of pulse, forward pulse, I think. So compare that to this piece of Thelonious Monk. Okay, same instrument, but a much different feel. The pace is much slower, gives it a much more relaxed and calm feeling. Okay, so that's tempo. Let's now consider the texture of music. So this is about the way the music is rendered or how it sounds and how that can make us feel. So let's start off by having a listen to a rough, raspy piece of rock music. Okay, so now contrast the feeling of that with this piece from Enya, I believe. I think I agree, much calmer feeling on that particular piece. So, based on considerations such as this, our semiotics expert drew up a list of 6 parameters or variables to define how music can communicate meaning. So I'll quickly run through what those are. Coming in at number 1, psychophysical. So that's all about the tempo, the volume, and the predictability of the music, and how that affects, our primitive brain and makes us feel more or less excited in a psychological sense. Second is instrumentation. So this is different instruments played in different ways can convey different feelings. So, for example, a guitar plucked gently is quite an intimate feeling, whereas somebody playing a fanfare on a trumpet is much more bombastic. So that's instrumentation. Third up is tonal character. So this is all about key and how the key of the song can make us feel. And I guess the easiest way of illustrating this is that major keys tend to sound more happy and minor keys tend to sound a bit more sad. Fourth up is sonic metaphor. So that's that texture point, how the song is rendered, how that makes us feel. Rough, raspy, glitchy songs can make us feel a bit uncomfortable. Smoother flowing songs can make us feel more relaxed and reassured. Fifth is genre markers. So over time and across our lives, we get conditioned to interpret certain genres as conveying certain meanings. So, for example, a lot of people associate jazz with sophistication. Nice. But punk music is a little bit more rebellious, so there's those implicit meanings in the genre as well. And finally, this is my favourite one, intertextuality. So this is about the way that music comes bundled up with lots of wider cultural or societal associations that convey meaning as well. So it's not going to be much help for people in this room, but maybe you can search it on YouTube later. In the mid-'80s, Levi's ran a series of ads using music, and since that time, whenever I heard it through the grapevine, I always think of a man sitting in a laundrette in white boxer shorts. If you want to know what I'm talking about, search Levi's "Heard It Through the Grapevine" ad, and you'll find out. But anyway, it's about that sort of stuff. Certain music might be linked to certain other things. So that's all very interesting. You're probably going, that's great, but what does it mean? How does it relate to brands? That's a very good question. So we asked, when we spoke to the planners, we asked them some questions about what are the words they most commonly use in advertising briefs to convey a sense of how the brand is intended to make us think or feel. And basically, we boiled that down to a total of 24 words, 12 think words and 12 feel words. And here they are. We then used our 6 musical parameters to sort of deconstruct music and try and understand how certain music characteristics will convey these sort of meanings. So I'll just give you one example. So this is for Enchanted. So you can see the musical parameters across the top, and then a description about how music might convey Enchanted within that context. I'm not going to read them out to you. You all look very intelligent and capable of reading. So we repeated this same exercise for all 24 words. We then spoke to a team of international music experts from Europe, the US, and Brighton in the UK, and we asked them. We really wanted to source a selection of 5 different types of music across genre, which gives a sense of each of these different words. So you can see now we've got 24 words, we've got 6 variables, we've got 5 pieces of music. If you like to do permutations and combinations, that's a massive number and quite difficult to navigate. So we constructed something called the Brand Music Navigator to house all of this. It's all available on the Radiocentre website, or you can just Google Brand Music Navigator and it's freely available to access. But I'll give you a quick tour of it now. So this is the homepage. When you land on it, you have your think words and your feel words. So you click on think words, it brings up the whole list. And we're going to have a look at witty. So if we click on witty, we then go through to the witty landing page. Not literally, it's not a funny page. And there are 3 options. So the first one is word palette. And when we click on word palette, that basically gives us a spectrum of words that all link to the word witty. So whilst I might think I'm particularly droll in the way I present, there's probably a lot of people out there thinking you're very facetious, and they're sort of linked but not entirely. So that's all about making it as broadly relevant as possible. The second tab gives us our musical parameters. So those are the 6 variables that I talked through earlier, and you can click on each one of these to see the description about what would be the musical characteristics under tonal character that convey witty. You can read those for yourself, and also sonic metaphor, to give an example, which is, I've got my glasses so I can't read it. Inventive and nimble with mimetic effects. There we go. So that's sort of helpful. But maybe it's when you get onto the final point, the music inspiration, that starts to make a bit of sense. So for each word, we have 5 examples of music that are intended to convey that word or that meaning. So witty. So let's click on one of these. Let's say minor swing, and then it pops up this little box. If you're in the UK, you can click on the box and listen to a 30-second segment. Because of music rights issues, if you're in anywhere else, you have to click on the YouTube link, which is also there underneath. But if you were to click on it, you would hear this. I don't know, does it feel a bit witty to you? Maybe? And you read underneath, it tells you exactly how this piece of music conveys wittiness within the confines of our parameters. And then at the top, you also have some hashtags. So if you like this piece of music and you want to explore something that links to it at the top, click on that and it will take you through elsewhere into the tool for you to listen to the music examples there. And to make it as practical as possible, we've housed all of the research that I've taken you through today in this tool, as well as much more information about the semiotic analysis, if you're interested in that. And finally, we've got a list of helpful questions to think about if you're considering developing music branding. So, to summarise, up front, we talked about how people asked us to come up with new information about the way music works for brands and some guidance on how they can make more effective use of it. In terms of the new information, I think our EEG study clearly demonstrated how consistent brand music is a really powerful tool for advertisers, making ads more familiar, better liked, and encouraging audiences to engage more deeply with them. And in terms of the guidance, our semiotic analysis, I think, really interestingly demonstrates how music implicitly communicates both rational and emotional meaning for brands, and sort of gives a helpful structure for more objective conversations about the role that music can play for individual brands. So taken in combination with all of the other research that's done in this field, we think it demonstrates that music is an incredibly powerful multiplier of effectiveness and meaning for brands. So that's this. I'll just say, so how can you make use of this? Well, if you're on the sales side or you deal with advertisers, then I think about helping them develop some music that they can use consistently across their radio ads. Number one, it'll make their advertising more effective, so they'll be coming back for more. But number two, it also provides a very helpful framework. So if you've got a tactical advertiser that uses lots of messages, this gives a neat framework for those messages to drop into. Also, whichever side of the business you're on, have a play with the brand music navigator. Even if you're on the programming side, it might give you some interesting thoughts about the type of music you're playing and what that communicates about your station. So we're taking questions at the end. So now I'll hand over to Urosh. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch up later.